Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to my new video where we are going to go over my top 5 tips that I think every single blue Kayn player needs to know. Now, my goal behind this video is to make you a better League of Legends player, as well as to give you a better understanding of the champion as a whole. Now, I heavily value your guys' time, so I make sure to put timestamps at every single point of the videos in this series. So, if you want to skip this intro, if you want to skip a particular tip, there are going to be timestamps at the top of the page, as well as the scrolling bar at the bottom is going to be segmented into the different tips if you want to navigate it that way. Now, I'm a bit limited with this format, only doing about 5 tips, so I would really find it quite helpful if you guys comment your own tips down below so you can share your knowledge with the other players that might be finding this video. Maybe they're brand spanking new to Kayn. So with all that out of the way, let's jump into tip number 1. Alright, and getting into tip number 1 for blue Kayn, the skill indicator is a little bit off. It is actually a little bit longer than what the arrow would actually infer. So whenever you are looking to play it out, it's going to take a little bit of time if you're newer to Kayn to get a really good understanding of how long exactly the W is going out when you are playing blue Kayn. But second part of this tip, and I think a lot more of an important part of this tip, because this is a very, very common mistake I see lower elo Kayns, particularly in gold, platinum elos. They are coming out from the they're looking for a pick, say, and they're in the jungle. They throw out their W and then they Q straight out of the wall like that. This is a really, really big no-no unless the target is right on top of that, because you are missing out on 50% of the damage that you could possibly be getting out of your Q. So how you want to look to approach this type of pick scenario is by using your wall, then by throwing out the W, coming out of the wall with your increased movement speed that is going to be coming from your shadow step at extra 80%, and closing as much distance to the target as possible, as well as getting into position to land both parts of your reaping slash. So make sure you are taking full advantage of your combo and your ability to close the gap at a very, very quick pace to maximize the amount of damage of your combo, because a lot of the times when you are missing kills with Assassin Kayn, it is coming down to just that little bit of extra HP that they are getting away with. So you really want to look to optimize the usage of your W, Q, and E. And that will wrap up tip number 1 for Kayn. Alright, and getting into tip number 2, a very important part of blue Kayn's kit is his overall mobility and ability to move when he is throwing out his W. If you are a brand new Kayn player, or maybe you're someone that just only played red Kayn because it was a little bit better last season, you always want to be making sure that you're inserting a movement command with your W so you can look to close the distance, kite out abilities, and look to dodge any kind of rebuttal that the enemy might have. This is going to just make you a lot less predictable, and it will allow you to close the distance even more, as well as get into position to hit both parts of your Q as well. So you can see that you really need to focus on getting as much mobility as possible out of this kit, because your increased movement speed and high amounts of damage is really where your carry potential comes from. I just want to instill this into you guys. So always make sure that you are moving and you aren't falling into that old habit of when you are pre-form or red Kayn and how you are unable to move when you are throwing out your W. And that will wrap up tip number 2 for Kayn. Alright, and getting into the next tip, we are going to talk about his overall defensive capabilities when playing blue. And as you know, it is a lot more important to take full advantage of these when playing blue Kayn, because you are going to be a lot squishier and you have a smaller amount of health pool to work with. So what you have to be looking to utilize is by the overall amount of bait that you can provide for an enemy by just being up into the wall in an E. Say it's something like a brand or a fizz, or something with a lot of bursts. Just staying in the wall and waiting for them to throw out skill shots at you with your increased amount of movement speed is going to be one of the most effective ways to play out these different situations. Next up, obviously, your ultimate can be used as both a offensive and a defensive tool. You're able to dodge out on important skill shots like something like a Fizz ultimate, and you always want to make sure that you are using it in that way of being able to dodge that really high pick potential. So with his ability to do this, it really opens up a lot of doors for Blue Kayn in particular matchups. He is extremely good into burst type of team comps and champions because he is able to dodge out on high value skills, things like a Xerath E, things like a Fizz R, things like a ZR. This is really where Kayn can shine, and you should always look for these enemy team comps to pull the Kayn out and really start causing some havoc around the rift. So again, you want to use your overall increased movement speed to dodge out on skills, as well as high impact spells should be really dodged with your Unborrowed Chest Pass. And that will wrap up this tip. Alright, and getting into the next tip with Kayn, we're going to talk about target prioritization and team fighting. And what you really need to have a very good understanding of is the overall potential you have in team fights. You have a massive ability to one-shot an enemy target. Now, you are an ability-based cooldown champion. You are not a consistent damage champion like Jack. So what this means is you need to get the most bang for your buck when you are using your all-in abilities. So what this means is you should be constantly checking out the enemy scoreboard, looking for a big item spike. Maybe there's an enemy crit ADC that just hit 3 items. Maybe it's earlier in the game and someone just hit a Triforce. It's a massive 1-item power spike. You need to look for those kind of targets just so you can get the biggest rate of return on your overall investment by throwing out your big longer cooldown abilities like your ultimate on the target. For example, if there is a 0-4 ADC that you could easily one-shot but isn't really going to have too much of a threat during the game, you really should not be focusing that champion. Always keep a good understanding of this before you get into the team fight so you know where to position. Obviously, when playing an assassin play style, vision denial is absolutely huge, so things like sweeper and pink wards are worth their weight in gold, and this will really enable your ability to get behind the enemy and get a very strong flank off and get a lot of target prioritization when you are going in. The last thing you would want to do is by taking a very basic overall path towards the enemy in a front to back fashion, and you end up getting CC'd by a tank up in the front. So always make sure that you are doing 2 things in team fights. You're figuring out what is the best champion to focus and what angle is the best for your approach when you are playing Kayn. And that will wrap up this tip. Alright, and for the final tip, we are going to be getting in a little bit of a theory crafting and how you want to look to play out the game when you are playing Kayn. You want to look for very volatile lanes that you can gank to get the most return on the biggest resource of all in League of Legends, and that is jungler's time and where you should be spending it. Really big red flags are double fighters in the top lane. Something like a Fiora into a Darius is a really common example of a lane that can be highly volatile. Once one champion gets ahead, it just snowballs really heavily in a certain way. Next up, in the mid lane, the really volatile lanes are double melee matchups. Now, mages can recover really well if they have a rough laning phase, so they do not have to be high priority if it's something like a Victor versus a Vel'Koz or Lux. So looking for lanes like maybe something like a Fizz versus a Kassadin can be really rough, so always look for those spots. Now, in the bottom lane, you want to be looking for as much gank assistance as possible, so something like a Thresh can be very powerful, hitting hooks and setting up ganks and allowing you to snowball. But overall, one of the best absolute ways to play out the game is when you can provide pressure on the enemy's jungle and take him out of the game. This is going to heavily enable your lanes to be able to take the trades they want to trade, because they know where, first of all, the enemy jungler is, and that is he is off the map after you kill him. So if you are finding it a very commonplace that you're doing well, but your team is falling apart around you, affect the enemy jungler as much as possible and take him out of the game as much as possible. That'll wrap up my final tips, guys. If you have any questions for me, you can hit me up in the comments down below. I'm also going to put a pinned comment with my Discord if you want to send me any direct messages. And as always, guys, take it easy.